So hopefully some of you have been able to make some money off of my suggestions over DraftKings picks for the Millionaire Maker contest over the past couple of weeks. Apologies though to anybody that played Peyton Manning last week because I thought he might have a good game. Oopsie daisies. That's what I get. And I apologize. So hopefully I can make things right for you this week. So let's go ahead and I'll give you my Week 11 NFL Millionaire Maker DraftKings picks. Now, we'll start off at quarterback. I'm usually not a fan of putting big money into the quarterback position because I think a lot of times the guys that win the biggest money in these weekly contests play the lower end quarterback 6,000 and below. But with that said, sometimes it's a good play. It's a good play, and you just got to roll with it. A Tom Brady at 8,500 against the Bills, I think, is a solid play. While Rex Ryan is obsessed with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots, it doesn't change the fact that in Week 2, the Patriots smoked those jokers through the air for over 400 yards. I mean, Brady had a monster day. And I haven't really seen a whole lot lately that leads me to believe that the Buffalo Bills can stop Tom Brady. Will he put up 400-plus yards passing? Probably not. 300-plus yards passing and maybe 3 touchdowns? Probably. So at 8,500, he's a good play. Carson Palmer at 6,700, even with the prospect of Michael Floyd and or John Brown being either limited by injury or not able to play on Sunday night against the Bengals, Carson Palmer still has Larry Fitzgerald. He's coming to play the Bengals. They'll be in Arizona. It's a revenge game. I like revenge games. And Carson Palmer's been a pretty consistent fantasy performer all year, regardless of who's been playing or not playing. At 6,700, I really like him. Tony Romo at 6,000 is a gamble. I will give you that. But, I think he's a good gamble because the dollar amount's not that high. And I don't like a lot of the quarterback matchups this week. So Romo at 6K, you have to think the Cowboys are going to want to throw the ball a lot with them. They're going to feel good about themselves. So maybe guys like Des Bryant and Jason Witten will be more prominently featured in the offense. They'll have bigger days, especially if Darren McFadden is limited or cannot play at all because he's questionable right now. Romo at 6,000 is not a horrible play. Matthew Stafford at 5,400. I wouldn't go run into the bank with this pick. It's just kind of a hunch in terms of the matchup that he has. He could put up some big numbers because of the fact that his offense is one-dimensional. That's what I'll say. Now, in terms of running backs, here's another key position where putting all your money in the big-name guys isn't always the way to go, although I do like some of the bigger dollar guys this week. I like Freeman for the Falcons at 8,400 because he's the lead ball carrier for that Falcons offense by and large, beyond question. He gets targeted in the passing game. So he's a pretty good bet to end up with at least on a bad week 20 points. And if you could slot in one of your players to give you 20 points guaranteed, that's pretty good money. That's a pretty safe money bet. What you don't want to have is a guy that you spend 8,000 on give you 5 points or 8 points, and that's pretty devastating. But a guy like Freeman, even on a week where he doesn't have a huge game, he could still give you, like I said, around 20 or so because of the way he's utilized and how often and frequently he is utilized. So at 8,400, I like him against the Colts. Adrian Peterson at 6,800 against the Packers, I like, even though his yardage totals this year are a bit deceiving just because of the number of big runs that he's had. But the fact of the matter is, Adrian Peterson keeps coming up with these big runs, so it becomes a trend. It doesn't just become a fluke. And, he's been a guy over the years. He knows what to expect from the Green Bay Packers. The Minnesota Vikings are going to want to control the ball and control the clock on offense, which means a lot of opportunities for AP. And at 6,800, a Packers defense isn't that good. I like his matchup. I really like DeMarco Murray at 6,000 this week, going up against Tampa Bay. While Tampa Bay isn't terrible against the run, they're not great either. And I look at no Ryan Matthews, knowing that Darren Sproles and even Kenyon Barner, if they're used this week, they're going to be used more in complementary roles, knowing that DeMarco Murray probably will at least surpass 20 carries, if not 25 carries this week, and get some targets in the passing game. He doesn't have to be the most efficient in the world to give you 20-plus points, and that's what I think he'll do this week. Danny Woodhead for the Chargers at 5,300. They still, Melvin Gordon really hasn't figured it out yet. He's not really a good fit for what they do offensively. And as a result, Woodhead ends up being a bit of a better fit, and he gets utilized a lot in that passing game, especially now with no Keenan Allen, no Malcolm Floyd outside at receiver. They're hurting there. Means more targets and opportunities for Woodhead. He also gets some goal line carries as well. 5,300 is a good number for Woodhead this week. LeGarrette Blount at 5,000. He's clearly the lead back. At some point in time, maybe there'll be a week where Brandon Bolden or James White has a nice week in that Dion Lewis type of role. But for the moment, LeGarrette Blount is clearly the bell cow back. And as a result, as the bell cow back, he's going to get a lot of opportunities to run the ball against the Bills defense that hasn't been that good against the run. I like the matchup. Frank Gore at 4,700 taking on the Falcons. The Falcons' run defense isn't that good. They're going to take the brakes off of Frank Gore's pitch count, if you will. He's going to get more opportunities, especially with Hasselbeck at quarterback now. They're going to want to limit how much of the pressure they put on Hasselbeck to lead him to victory. Gore at 4,700, he's clearly the lead back. He's not in a timeshare. He will get 20-plus carries. He even gets a couple of targets in the passing game, surprisingly. You got to like Frank Gore at 4,700. And I really like Charcandrick West at 4,500 this week for the Chiefs going up against the Chargers. Chargers give up a lot of points to running backs, as evidenced by the Monday night game 2 weeks ago where Jeremy Langford went off on him. Charcandrick West can do some of those similar things, at least at 4,500, a pretty good play in my opinion. In terms of wide receivers, there are not a lot of wide receiver matchups that I really, really like this week. I really don't. I like Mike Evans at 7,300 just because of the fact going up against the Eagles have struggled against number one wide receivers this year mightily. Mike Evans is the guy that is going to get a lion's share of targets in the passing game with Jameis Winston, especially if Vincent Jackson is limited and either plays in a somewhat limited capacity or can't play at all, and Austin Seferian-Jenkins still not being back. Somebody's got to catch the ball. Evans is clearly the go-to guy. And the matchup's okay, 7,300, I like it. Evans has put up some good numbers recently. He's done well by me, so I'm going to stick with him for the time being. Larry Fitzgerald, 7,200. He's been another really consistent fantasy performer throughout the year. You look at the fact it's a revenge game for Carson Palmer against the Bengals. Michael Floyd and or John Brown could either miss the game or be limited in their role, meaning Fitzgerald's going to see a lot of opportunities. 7,200 screams to me, play this guy, play this guy, play this guy. Even if it ends up where he only puts up 15 points, sometimes you just have to look at the matchup and look at the other key indicators and say, there's no reason this guy doesn't put up 30 points this week. And that's what I look at with Fitzgerald. I like Stephon Diggs at 5,000 against the Packers' young secondary. Diggs has had a couple of slow weeks now after really bursting onto the scene a few weeks back with a string of a few really nice games, starting with that Denver game. But Diggs, 5,000, has some explosive big playability. I like him this week. Tavon Austin at 4,600. While the Rams have Case Keenum at quarterback, and who knows what goes on there, and that would lead me to not want to recommend anybody on the Rams offense, including Todd Gurley, who I really didn't recommend this week. Austin, 4,600. Going up against the Ravens' really bad secondary, knowing that they've tried to manufacture ways to get touches for Tavon Austin. If there's any wide receiver that's going to have a nice week for the Rams, it's going to be him, I would think. In terms of the New England Patriots, they've got two wide receivers who I like this week, especially because of their dollar figure. With Edelman being out, at least through the regular season now, guys like Brandon LaFell and Danny Amendola have big opportunities to, at least for the next couple of weeks until the salaries readjust themselves, to outproduce their salary by quite a bit. LaFell at 4,300. He's the bigger guy, so you would think he would get some red zone targets. Outside of Gronk, he might get the most red zone targets in the passing game. Danny Amendola at 4,000. He's going to be obviously the most likely candidate to fit in that Edelman role where you play him all over the place. He gets a lot of safety valve and safety blanket type of targets, so it's not going to be all that surprising if you see Amendola end up with a game where he has 10 catches, 80 yards, maybe a touchdown. And if he does that, he's giving you 24 points since it's a PPR situation with DraftKings. 24 points out of a guy that only cost you 4,000. That's a ticket to win yourself some big money. And I also like Stevie Johnson at 3,900 too. Similar type of philosophy. No Keenan Allen, no Malcolm Floyd outside. The Chargers really can't run the ball that well, and the Chiefs give up a lot of yards through the air. It's a good matchup for Stevie Johnson at a good number of 3,900. Tight ends, Gronk at 7,700. Gronk is Gronk, so he's been a pretty consistent producer this year. So at 7,700, I like him, although I don't like him maybe as much as you would think I should, in part because, like, you look at last week's game against the Giants, if he doesn't have that really big catch, he had a pretty pedestrian day. He's had a couple of somewhat pedestrian days, more than you might anticipate with Gronk. Jason Witten at 5,100. While I think he's a bit overpriced based off of his actual production this year, maybe this week's number is actually factoring in the return of Tony Romo. Because Jason Witten, with Tony Romo throwing them the ball, is an entirely different football player. Outside of Des Bryant and maybe even including Des Bryant, that Jason Witten is going to be the most targeted Cowboy in the passing game when Tony Romo's there. So you look back at week 1 against the Giants where he had, I think it was like 8 catches, 60 yards, but 2 touchdowns. And the next week he had an okay game before Romo went out. Witten's kind of been scuffling a little bit, in part because he's not getting targeted as much, not getting utilized the same way as much. Now Romo's back, and maybe that changes. Gates at 4,800 for the Chargers taking on the Chiefs. Chiefs are really good against opposing tight ends. They're one of the best defensive units in the NFL against tight ends. But again, this is still a Chiefs team that gives up a lot of yards through the air. This is an Antonio Gates who is still by far Phillip Rivers' most trusted weapon. He's going to get red zone opportunities. He's going to get a lot of targets. So even at 4,800, even with the matchup, you have to say, I like Gates this week. I like Eric Ebron taking on the Raiders this week at 3,500 because the Raiders have been really bad for most of the season against opposing tight ends. And Ebron the past few weeks has gotten at least 5 targets. And last week against the Packers, I believe he had 8 targets. So his target numbers are going up. He could be an explosive guy if utilized properly. Could get, again, a couple of red zone opportunities against a Raiders team that is really bad consistently defending tight ends. 3,500 a good number, as is Fleener at 3,200 for the Colts taking on the Falcons. Falcons aren't great against opposing tight ends from a fantasy standpoint. Furthermore, we know that Hasselbeck has a good rapport and a good relationship with Kobe Fleener, which could mean some big opportunities for Fleener in the passing game this week. So 3,200, I think he's got a good number, especially if you utilized him as a flex option. It really allows you at 3,200 to devote that salary into other places to help you support carrying a Tom Brady or Julio Jones at 9,300 or Devontae Freeman at 8,400, a Des Bryant at 7,700, whatever the case might be, or Gronk at 7,700. It's guys like Fleener that allow you to do those things that really helps you to win some potential big-time money. In terms of defense and special teams units this week, the Seahawks are at 4,000, which I don't usually like putting that much into a defense. I think sometimes we overanalyze the defense special teams, and as a result, you've outsleuthed yourself, and you think you usually did a whole lot better than you actually did. But at $4,000 even, you still have to like the Seahawks matchup against a 49ers team that really is going to struggle to run the ball against them and has Blaine Gabbert as their starting quarterback. I mean, will the Seahawks put up the most points defensively as a unit this week? I don't know about that, but I would find it hard to believe that they would get shredded by the 49ers, especially because you would think that the Seahawks, would want to sit there and get some revenge after getting beat last week at home by the Cardinals. You would think that they'd be angry, they'd be hungry this week, and, with them, they have no problem getting themselves up to play the 49ers. That's what I'm saying. The Patriots at 3,200 against the Bills are an okay play. I think the Eagles at 3,100 are an even better play because even though Jameis Winston's progressed throughout his rookie season, he still has that propensity to turn the ball over. And when you look at it, there's always that potential for him to have a 3 or 4 pick game. And the Eagles can get some pass rush, so they get some sack numbers, it seems like, every week. They can always force a couple of turnovers. And in the return game, they're pretty good. They always have the threat to be able to take one back to the house. And that's where you really score some big points from a fantasy standpoint. So even if the Eagles give up 20 or 24 points, they could end up with 3 sacks, 2 picks, and a touchdown, and they've still put up a nice day for you. And again, only at $3,100. But I really, really like the Jets this week at 3,000. Coming off of their last game, that loss against the Bills, they're probably going to be angry. They're facing a Houston Texans team that will be playing another backup quarterback in TJ Yates. No running game for the Texans, a backup quarterback, DeAndre Hopkins coming to Revis Island. The Jets at 3,000 look like a solid play this week. And one other kind of really under-the-radar play at 2,100 might be the San Francisco 49ers. The last time they faced the Seahawks in that Thursday night game a couple of weeks back, they ended up putting up 10 points as a defense. This is still a Seahawks offense that really isn't all that good, not all that explosive. The 49ers can at times rush the passer effectively, and they did last time they played the Seahawks. I think they had 5 or 6 sacks and forced a couple of turnovers. And if they did that again, even if they give up 17 or 20 points, they're still going to end up giving you double digits. And if you get double digits out of a defense and special teams unit and only spend $2,100 on them, that's a lot of money that you can invest in other places. So in terms of plays and matchups this week, I've let you know what I like most. If you have other questions for me about what to do this week, then please feel free to hit me up on Twitter at @TheJeffSchlegel. On Twitter is the Twitter handle. Talk to you later.